Hello guys, it's me Butterfly Spirit 314. So guys, today what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about why I've been taking a break from sewing. So as you can see behind me, I have some Italian fabric here. And basically I was going to make a tote bag. And um, I was going to make it, but I didn't end up making it. I have some laptop bags I was going to be making, like little, I'm sorry, not laptop bags, tablet bags. So I have some tablet bags. I had went through the process of cutting out the fabric for the straps and the body of the bags and the pocket of the bags and stuff. I went, gathered the zippers for the bags, all that. But I decided to put all of that on hold. The reason I put that on hold, guys, is because I took a crash course in sewing, and the crash course was with a online sewing school. So it's called Vintage Sewing School. This is a sewing school by Evelyn Wood. So she has her own YouTube channel. And what happened is that I had heard about her vintage sewing school, and I heard about it because basically I was subscribed to her because I was, subscribed to sewing channels on YouTube, you know, a couple of years ago because I got into sewing. And so I was like, well, let me go ahead and basically go and, learn about sewing. And she was one of the people whose videos that I watched on YouTube about sewing. I also watched videos from Blueprint DIY, and some other, sewing channels and stuff too on YouTube. And, although I heard about Evelyn's Vintage Sewing School, I went to her site, but I was like, this isn't for me. I have, sewing classes that I can go to my area. So why on earth is it that I would, join this school? And I was like, well, I don't feel like, that I would need that, and that's what I thought. And being a beginner sewer, um, I wish I would have started taking classes as part of her vintage sewing school. I wish I would have done that. I now, looking back, I wish I would have done that because the sewing classes that I took in person, like my first sewing class, I learned about basically how to thread a machine and how to wind a bobbin. Very helpful, right? Um, and classes after that, I learned how to make stuff. One class, I learned how to make a tote bag. Another class, I learned how to make a cosmetic bag. Another class I took, I learned how to make, I learned how to make a pillowcase. Another one, I learned how to make a pillow. And these were all classes that I took in my local area. And so I was like, well, there's no need for me to, you know, there's no need for me to, take advantage of this vintage sewing school. There's really no reason, right? And that's what I thought. I'm like, I can learn everything I need to learn in an in person class. And that's what I thought. So fast forward to this point now where I've had frustrations over the time that I have been sewing. So I've made a lot of things. Like I've made bags mostly, but I've had frustrations, and there were things I didn't really understand, why certain things were happening, you know? Like one thing I didn't understand was like, well, why, when I would sew, there would be times where like there would be this big jam of thread um, on the back of the fabric. Like I didn't understand that. Um, I didn't understand, why it was, let's say that my zigzag stitches were so loose, you know. Um, and also with my sewing machine, I didn't really feel comfortable with doing things like cleaning my sewing machine or anything. I was like, oh no, I'll just leave it the way it is, And basically, I was, using the things I learned in person classes, but there were just, there were things that I would be frustrated about, but then I was scared to kind of ask about. And so, recently I found out was brought back to, the vintage sewing school, like Evelyn Wood's vintage sewing school. And I was kind of brought back to it. And I looked at her website, and I found out there was a free crash course on sewing. And I was like, why not give it a shot, And I kind of read the description, and got kind of intrigued. And it was like a 7 day course that you can take and stuff. You have to take it in 7 days. And I got kind of interested in it. And little did I know that going through and taking that free course, I had no idea that it was going to answer some questions for me that I did not know. Like, it was going to help, like, explain things to me that like explain away, like, it gave me answers to why I was having frustrations in my sewing. And I've been sewing for 2 years. And here it is, this free course. I'm learning things that I feel like I should have learned in my first ever sewing class that I took in person, in my area, you know? But now I'm learning it 2 years later. And so, I've been taking a break from sewing because I took advantage of the crash course. And then I finally got into the vintage sewing school. And I've been learning some pretty cool things. I just finished I finished the sewing machine class, which has been hugely helpful because it's taught me some things that I didn't know about the sewing machine. I've had my sewing machine for a couple of years, right? But I'm learning things about it that I didn't know. So, some things I learned recently, now that I finished the sewing machine class. One of the things I learned where the tension dial is on my machine for the upper tension of the upper thread. So I learned where that is. Didn't know that. You know, I learned about the fact of um, I learned about the fact that how to tell that your machine has good tension, how to know, what is the best setting for tension on the sewing machine, what's the typical setting to have, right, for the sewing machine for the tension, right? Um, I learned about how to actually clean my machine. I learned about the fact that vintage machines actually need to be oiled. The machine I have doesn't specifically need to be. But I've learned things about my sewing machine that I didn't know. There's some things I did know, but there's a lot of things that like have blown my mind. I'm like, whoa, seriously? And it's really bringing in my excitement about sewing. Now, there are some things where I'm like, I know some of the stuff, but there's a lot of things that I don't know. And so basically, I've just been taking my time to learn so far. And I am going to be, like, it might be maybe another month, and then I might be doing a project and stuff. My first ever project as a part of the Vintage Sewing School. Um, but I think that I want to soak in this knowledge because, like I was saying in the beginning, there's a lot of gaps in learning that I didn't have. Like, if you watch YouTube tutorials on how to sew stuff, like, there will be these videos and they'll say, how to sew a dress, how to sew a dress for beginners, or, how to do, sew that pants for beginners or skirt or whatever. Okay. Let me tell you, the stuff about beginner tutorials on how to make stuff, the people who are doing those tutorials, there's knowledge that they have that you don't have. There may be adjustments to their sewing machine that you don't know to do and you're not aware of. And the reason you're not aware of it is because they're not showing that part. Like, I was making a project and they talked about curved seams. I tried to sew a curved seam. I've been sewing for 2 years, and I really, I can say I suck at doing curved seams. Like, I literally do. Now that I've learned, as a part of the crash course, like how to sew a curved seam, you know, now that I know how to do that, baby steps, right? Not perfectly, but I know how to do it somewhat, and I know what to look for to kind of how to do it. That actually makes it easier for me to sew a curved seam, right? If I'm making a wallet, it makes things a lot easier, right? Than me just like following a tutorial and the person is not showing how they're doing it. I could be doing the same movements as them, but it doesn't mean I'm going to make a good curve seam like them, you know. But thanks to, the sewing school that I'm in, I'm learning how to do these things, you know, and I'm actually getting more comfortable with the sewing experience because I want it to be more pleasurable than me getting frustrated and mad. Because there's times on my sewing projects I get pissed off, I get mad and stuff, and I'm just like, why is this not turning out the way I wanted to? Like, why does hers look like this? Mine looks like the way the other person did it, but there's imperfections I'm looking at, and I'm like, well, why am I not confident in my sewing? I've been sewing for 2 years, So right now I'm filling in the gaps. And I have to say, I'm learning so much. And I'm really excited about the things that I'm learning. And I'm happy about that. And it makes me feel good about it too. One thing you guys probably don't know is a lot of the fashion designers that, are big names like, Coco Chanel and Giorgio Armani, Versace, um, what is it? Fendi, who else is, I'm trying to think of who else um, there's there's a lot of designers that, I think Schiaparelli, I think that's right. There's tons of designers out there, right? uh, Givenchy, all types of designers, right? A lot of fashion designers, one of the things people don't know is these people know how to sew their ass off. Like, some of the fashion designers, they're not alive anymore, but by and large, if you learn about a lot of fashion people who are fashion designers, they know how to sew. You know what I'm saying? They got that background knowledge in sewing. It's not like they don't, they do. That's how they're able to make the clothes and fashions they do and accessories they do because they have that background in sewing. And that's something I didn't know. I looked at this article online and they were like saying something like, "Oh, well, it's okay if a fashion designer doesn't know how to sew." And here I am on these, you know, like designer websites, like looking at handbags and comparing like the bags I make to the designer bags on these websites, and I'm looking like, well, what is it that this designer is able to do, or their products are in comparison to my bags? And the thing is that they are using techniques in sewing that basically that should be introductory knowledge. You know what I'm saying? But this introductory knowledge is knowledge that's not necessarily that people will have if they don't know how to sew, right? Me learning stuff in, the Vintage Sewing School right now, it's making me excited about sewing, and that's why I'm putting a lot of my sewing projects on hold because basically it's helping me learn. Like, I did a project where I was making a tablet bag and I was installing a zipper. And my first time ever being introduced to a zipper foot, you know, like I was intimidated about it, and I didn't like using a zipper foot on my sewing machine. I just like using the straight sewing machine foot. I didn't like the zipper foot. Being in the Vintage Sewing School, I'm learning that the zipper foot is actually one of the feet that I'm actually going to use, one of the basic feet to use in addition to the standard foot on my machine. Zipper foot and then the standard foot, those are only two I need to really worry about. And that's beginner knowledge. But guess what? In my sewing classes, my first ever sewing class that I took in person in my area, that wasn't taught to me. it was not taught to me at all, right? And so, like I said, there's things that I'm learning, and this is why I'm taking a break from sewing, because I'm soaking in this knowledge, because I want to learn how to sew at a more expert level so I can be more comfortable with making whatever I want to. And if, let's say, I'm following a YouTube tutorial or following a pattern, because I'm intimidated by patterns, like getting into doing that kind of stuff. I'm intimidated by that. And the reason is because it takes building blocks to get there. And just taking the classes I've been taking, it's not enough to get me there. But the vintage sewing school is definitely going to get me there. So that's why I've been taking a break, because I'm in sewing school and I'm learning a lot right now. As a part of sewing school, there is a project that I'm going to be making. It's going to be like a bag that I'm going to be making. Um, but I haven't gotten there yet because I have to do another course that I'm going to be taking because I finished the sewing machine course. But there's another course that I'm about to start today. So I'm basically just taking in these gems of information so I can become an expert sewer and stuff, which will make sewing more pleasurable and stuff. And actually makes me more comfortable with like actually, doing maintenance on my machine, because I didn't even know I had to clean my machine. Like this whole time I was like, oh, I could just leave my machine the way it is. I don't want to bother with it. But now I'm starting to learn like, oh, okay. There's actually things on my sewing machine that I'm supposed to be doing to care for it. Just like I care for my car, there's things I need to do to care for my sewing machine. In fact, there's a class that I'm going to be taking. This is something that I found out about on Facebook. This is like, there's a class I found out about, and it's like about how to maintenance the sewing machine. And this is offered by another company and stuff, and they're gonna have like this basically like class about like how to maintenance a sewing machine. They have like a variety of classes, so that's kind of got me interested in that, on like maintenancing my machine and stuff like that. So, and that is separate from vintage sewing school, so that's something completely different. But it's just getting me more excited and happy about doing more stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited, and you're just happy to soak in this knowledge before I like jump back into sewing. Thanks for watching. Bye.